Let's say we have a character and we want to create hair for it that we can then export to GLP or Gltf files, right? So in order to do this, first thing we need to make our hair cards. So normally you can create hair cards using curves, but the only issue with using curves is that they require a lot more tinkering to get it right? And with particle system, we already have a grooming. We have different tools to groom our hair, and that just makes the process of setting it up much easier than if you were to do this in curve mode. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use particle system create hair cards. Image over here. Right, so let's say we're trying to make this kind of hair, right? So let me just go into my particle settings and let me just add a particle, change this to here, reduce the hair length to somewhere around here, and let me also enable my shortcut keys so you can see whenever I'm pressing any shortcut keys. Okay, so I think around here is perfectly fine. Okay, and then for the number of hair, I'm going to reduce this to 0, and for the segments, I think around 6 is perfectly fine. Okay, so now, so looking at our reference, we need to get an idea of the direction of hair and where it's going. And once you get a clear idea, we can then start creating particle system in that kind of flow to get our hair cards properly done. So while making particle system for our hair cards, we need to keep in mind that the roots of the hair is going to be visible and the rest is just going to be the hair strands. So make sure the front of the hair strands are like large enough to cover the base of the other hair strands. So I'm only going to add in as less strands as I can to get as much head covered as I can. And this usually varies with the kind of hairstyle that you have, but with this one we can easily use that kind of method. As for the side short hair, that's usually done using a texture inside of some Substance Painter, or we can also do this inside of Blender, but that's a part of the texture, not really hair cards. Here and make some small changes. So I'm going to change the count to 1. So anytime I click and hold, it's going to create one strand of hair, right? And that's what I want. Now, if I look at my reference, we can see that we have hair over here and then it's slightly going back. So let's try to follow this reference on our model. So I'm just going to add a bunch of strands over here. And for the spacing, I'm just trying to keep these as equally apart as I can, right? So these are 4 strands of hair, and then I'm just going to start combing these to get the direction that I want. Okay, so I don't like where this here is because the direction over here is not the same. So I'm just going to edit this out. So basically, these are standard hair grooming tools. You can check out. There are a lot of in-depth videos for this as well. But normally what you want to do is we have our combing. We can basically smooth our hair strands. We can add more hair strands. We can grow or shrink our hair strands. We can puff them out or we can just cut them. This last option I've never really used. And then over here, I'm going to enable this preserve root, disable this option. So I can basically move this here. Let me disable proportional editing. So now I can basically move my hair strand. If this is enabled, I won't be able to move it. So let me just disable it, move it a little bit, and then re-enable this. Okay. So once this is done, the rest is just spending some time getting the hair to look the way that you want. So I'm just going to basically increase the length and go in and start editing this out. Another cool thing that you can do is, for example, if I only want to make edits on this strand, so I just need to hover my mouse on top of this and press L, and it's going to select this hair strand. And now if I do use this comb brush, it's only going to affect this hair strand. This is like one of the things that makes this hair grooming way easier to do than curves editing, right? And basically, while you're making these haircuts, just keep in mind that each of this strand is basically going to be extruded on each side. So it's going to have some thickness to it. The size is completely up to you. So for example, if I want to have more like larger hair, I'm going to expand this out further. And if you're planning to have thinner haircuts, you can add more hair um, like close together, right? Okay. Okay, now I'm going to give this hair some basically some resolution so it doesn't appear this spiky. Also going to open up this viewport display and increase my steps from 2 to like 4 5, something like higher number, so we get a much better resolution. And then I can basically start editing my like making changes accordingly. So other thing we can do is make our hair basically stand out a bit more. So I'm gonna go over here, create a new material. Let's name this hair. I'm going to give this a slightly darker color, so something like black is perfectly fine. And then over here, I'm going to change my material from normal to hair. So now we can basically see our hair. Okay, so this is what a practical example would look like. So basically, if I go, these are the particle systems I have created for my character. So we have a top one, and then we have a side here. Usually I do, so if I know it's going to be mirrored, I only do it one side and then mirror it to the other side. And then we have our, these are stray hair so this is our front top hair strands. Then we have some stray hair strands. So basically I divided it into a bunch of groups. I usually find that easier. It's completely up to you how you want to manage it, but usually dividing it into separate parts and then basically makes the task much easier than if you were to do it all of it combined. So to create the hair card texture, I'm just going to hide this over here, and I'm going to create a new collection and name this hair cards. I'm going to create I'm going to add a camera over here. Go to my camera settings, change this to orthographic, change my resolution from my output properties. So make sure you have this square image, right? Textures usually need to be in the square image. So now if I go into my camera view, this is what I'm seeing. So what I'm going to do is create a plane over here. So let me just add this in. And basically I'm going to, let me just decrease its thickness, and I'm just going to add a particle system to it and create a hair, right? And now if I go into my camera view, this is what I'm seeing. So I'm just going to line it up. Basically hair cards usually have 2 to 3 variation of the hair that you're trying to create. So for example, for this one, let's start editing it out. So let me just lower the amount of hair strands that we are getting. Okay, let me just go for a very small number. So usually I keep it very small so I can edit it out. And basically the thing that we need to make sure is that it's equally spaced. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it. And over here, we're going to set up our, okay, let's do interpolated. And then over here, we're going to basically set up the setting of our hair. So if you look at our reference over here, basically we can see this clump of hair is thicker at the bottom and it's thinner as it go out, right? So I'm just going to change my clump setting. So we want thicker at the bottom and thinner as it goes to the top. Okay, once we have set the clump value, we can set up the roughness, and that's just going to make our hair have some slight more variation so it looks more natural instead of just straight hair going up. So it's you can experiment with these values and get the value that gives you the best result. And once you are happy, we can move on to the next stage. Once we are done with setting the values, I'm also going to increase the resolution of the hair. So just increase the step value, same as we did with our previous hair strands, and that will just give this more resolution. We can also increase the display amount and the render amount of our hair strands, so we get much fuller hair, and we can see, for example, where we need to move around our hair strands or what we need to do basically. We have somewhat of the setting that we're looking for. We can basically go into edit mode, particle edit mode, and make some changes. So basically these strands that are not properly spaced, I'm going to start moving these around so they have some distance between them. So yeah, basically just selecting the hair strand by pressing L and then moving these around so they are like equally spaced. And then we can also go make some small changes. So we can just add some slight roughness to it, some slight overlapping over here. Right, something like this. Once we are happy with how the hair looks, we can go to our material properties and create some material for our hair. So I'm just going to make this into shader editor, or we can just go to shading over here at the top. Okay, so right now this is plain white hair, so I'm just going to make this, let's say we want to make this slightly brownish. Okay, let's say this color is fine. Now we want to add some more variation, because right now all of this is same color. So I'm just going to go to my shader editor, search for a noise texture, right? And if I plug this in, so if you want to preview materials like this, make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled. So go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and just search for Node Wrangler, right? And make sure that this is enabled. This basically lets you preview materials when you press Control Shift click on them. So this is how this texture is basically giving variation to our hair strand, and we can basically increase or decrease the scale of this. So if I basically press Control T, it also adds a mapping node to this, and usually this lets you control how the texture is basically being mapped to your object, right? So let me just go for object over here. Yeah, no, I think generated is much better. So the material part was very long, so to cut it short, let me explain what I did over here. So let me just bring this up, and basically once you have your Node Wrangler enabled, you can Control Shift click to preview your nodes. So if I look at the noise texture over here, this is the transition. Like these, this is what I'm getting. I basically combine this with color ramp, so this basically changes my material to something like this. Let me go back to material preview. I think no, I think render is just fine. Okay, so with color ramp, I get this kind of look. So basically over here color ramp is controlling the colors. I can change these colors to whatever I want. If I want to make it darker, lighter, or whatever kind of hair I have in mind, so I chose these three colors. You can choose whatever you would like, and then I basically combine this with a multiply node. The reason for this, I have all the color for my hair strands. The next thing I wanted to add was a gradient. So basically the base of the hair, this should be darker, and as it goes up, the tip should be lighter. That's usually how like the hair shading is. So even if we look at over here, the base is darker, and as it goes up it is slightly lighter. So to basically do this, I created a gradient over here, a gradient texture over here, and then basically rotated it to get something like this. I'm using this to control how much intensity I want for this gradient. So color ramp just helps you control how intense you want. So let's say I want the base to be super obvious, I can make it darker or I can make it lighter, right? And once this is done, I'm basically adding this to my multiply node. I added an invert node because it was doing the invert of what I was doing. So the easiest solution was to invert it, or I could also flip colors over here, but I just added an invert node. Once that was done, I plugged all of this into base color, and I got my hair with random hair color strands and a gradient that's going from top to bottom. And I also did the same thing with the specular. Again, this is something you can do if you want to. It's the same setup as this. This is just to add some more um, highlights to my hair. It's not something you really need to do, but you can if you want to. Okay, so once this is set up, we can then render this out. Okay, so once the first one was done, I created some more hair strands following the same steps as we did before to get some more variations. And so this is the most dense hair, this is slightly less dense, and this is the thinnest hair that we have. And basically I just did the same thing that we did, and they are all using the same material setup. So same material but just different particle settings for each of these. And once this was done, you can just render it out. So while rendering, just make sure that your rendering is set to this kind of square resolution, so 2048 by 2048 or 1024 by 1024, whatever you think fits your requirement best. And then for the output, I've set it to PNG and with alpha turned on. And then I can just add in lights to my scene. So in this case, I only have this one area light, and then I can go to my camera and hit render image. Once this image is rendered, I can then save this. So let's just wait for this to render. So once this is rendered, I'm just gonna go to image, save as, and then just save this image externally. And so for example, in this case, if you get the hair strands are very low, just go to your particle settings and make sure you have your rendered amount set to a higher number than just so in this case it's 50. I would increase this to 200 or like some more greater number, so I get more resolution, more hair strands, and it will render just fine. So once this is done, we can move on to the next step. Yeah, and over here now it's basically our time to convert this into hair cards. So to do this, we're going to first convert this into mesh. So I'm going to go to this modifier properties and hit convert mesh. And basically what this does is convert my hair into these edges that are in the shape of the strand, right? Let me just disable this here. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is add some thickness to this strand of hair that we got. And to do this, I'm going to convert this to curve. I'm gonna go to object, convert, and convert to curve. And over in my curve properties, I'm going to change my geometry extrude from 0 to some higher value. And as soon as you start increasing it, you're going to see that usually it's not tilted in the right direction. So if it's not, just go into edit mode and press Ctrl T and you can rotate, right? And basically you can select individually any of these hair cards and rotate them individually as well. Okay, And the second thing that we need to do, that right now this is consistent and we want our hair to taper around these corners, right? And to do this, usually I use a curve. We don't want to do this by hand, so I'm gonna create another curve, bezier, and I'm going to add this as a profile taper object to my curve object, and then I'm just going to rotate this around to get the profile that I need. Okay, so once I'm happy with how it looks and I'm happy with the rotation of these hair cards, I can basically apply these settings and work on the texture of our hair. Okay, so right now we are getting a lot of these objects colliding with each other, and we're going to fix this in the next step. So I'm going to convert these back into mesh. So object, convert, mesh, and now in edit mode, we can basically I'm just going to add a strand in the middle for all of these here, and then I'm going to press Alt S to move this out, right? If you have this proportional editing enabled, you can disable this. Usually I keep it on, so it just gives it a slight offset, right somewhere around here where the hairs stop intersecting with each other. And I'm going to make sure that these roots are going inside of the skull, so they're not visible like this. And the rest is just basically going around making sure where you see these kind of empty spaces, just Alt S, or either just scale this down simply to close these gaps, because we don't want these visible when we go into our material preview mode. So let me just see how this looks if we had some texture over here. So let me just create a new material, and for this material I'm going to change my specular to 0, roughness to 1, and I'm going to add in a texture that we just created. And once I hit material preview, we're going to see something like this. Now we need to correct the UV mapping, but first let me change the material properties from alpha to alpha blend, and then over here I'm going to use this alpha as an alpha for this material. Now for the material, I'm gonna go into edit mode, select all of this, open up my texture over here, and then I'm just going to scale down, right? So we want right now this is going like this. We want its direction to be rotated, so RX 90, and then scale this down. So I was noticing a lot of gaps in the previous hair strands, so I redid my renders this time with more thicker hair strands towards the top, and they thin out like way less, so I get less visible gaps. So this gave a much better look than the one before, and you can basically go back and experiment with the values and then choose the values that work best with the kind of hair that you're trying to create. Okay, so this is an example of uh, what you should end with after you have done this for all of the hair cards. You have textured them, lined them up, and then applied different variations to different hair cards. So, for example, here I'm using I'm using only these two variations. I didn't really use the last one, but again, that's completely up to you. If you want to add more stray strands, you can go for that, but I didn't do it for this one. Once this is done, I can then just select my model and then go to file, export. Okay, so at this stage, if you want to if you have too much high resolution here and you want to lower it down, so for example these hair strands are much higher than the other ones, I can basically lower their resolution down by adding a decimate modifier. Just make sure you don't do it too much. So for example, if I go beyond a certain value, it's going to start messing with the mesh. So usually just go with 0.5 and then duplicate it once once or twice until it doesn't start affecting your mesh, and that usually gives you the best results. So once I have done this and I'm happy with how this everything looks, I can just select it and go to File, Export, GLB, and here I'm just going to uh, select this include selected, and under animation we don't have any, and under data mesh I'm going to make sure my modifiers are being applied, since I am using modifiers, and then I'm just going to export it. You can either export it as a GLB or Gltf according to your requirements. So once that is done, I'm just going to load this up to show you how this will look inside of Gltf viewer. So this is what this is how it should look in your viewer. And if you see some gaps over here, you can just go in and fill in those areas with proper texture, so it works fine. Let me know if you guys have any questions.